Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, debunking the myths about the Rudy Gobert trade. Some of those national headlines and storylines, you've heard them, all the talking heads that hate the trade. I'll tell you why the reasons for hating the trade are mostly wrong. We're going to do that all here today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Arcade 1-Up. Arcade 1-Up is giving away 3 free NBA Jam Shaq machines. That's right, 3. These are the guys known for making the incredible retro 3/4 scale at-home arcade games like Pac-Man, Golden Tee, and many more. Enter to win on arcade1up.com/locked-on. Again, arcade1up.com/locked-on for your chance to win one of those game consoles. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And lots of Rudy Gobert talk again today. I want to debunk some of the national myths that we're hearing out there. So we're going to get into that first. I will finish the show by talking a little summer league, looking at the roster as we inch closer to actual Timberwolves, quote unquote, in air quotes, Timberwolves basketball Friday evening. First of all, big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can watch this show on YouTube Monday through Friday. You can also listen on any of your favorite audio platforms from Apple to Google, Spotify to Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. And that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right, as mentioned, let's talk more Rudy Gobert. On Monday, we talked about his defensive impact for the Wolves. Tuesday, we talked about his offensive impact for the Wolves. And today, I want to talk about some of those national storylines. If you've listened to any national podcasts, they don't talk about the Timberwolves often, and they are now because this is the biggest trade by far that's happened so far, at least until the Kevin Durant stuff happens. This is all anybody's talking about. Although I will say after Tuesday night's Chet Holmgren performance in the Oklahoma City Thunder's first summer league game, maybe that will now take some of the headlines for I don't know, for better or for worse. Summer league. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. So the Rudy Gobert thing is still being talked about. You name your national NBA podcast, and they've talked about it. And I will let me start by saying this. I will concede the point that the Timberwolves overpaid for Rudy Gobert. I don't know that anybody's arguing that. I think in an honest moment, Tim Connolly would probably admit, like, "Hey, I never thought I'd trade this many picks." Like, I don't know, right? Nobody's worth this many picks except for maybe Kevin Durant, and now, of course, his market's probably all out of whack. So yeah, it's an overpay. The Timberwolves gave too much to get Rudy Gobert. If you're looking at, all things equal, what's his trade value? The 4 first rounders, 3 unprotected, 1 protected in 29, the pick swap, plus the fact that you're trading your first rounder from this year, Walker Kessler, a first round pick from just a couple of years ago, Lander Balmaro. You could argue it's anywhere from 4 to 7 first round picks, depending on how you want to splice it. Yeah, they pay too much. However, it doesn't mean that the whole thing's a disaster. It doesn't mean it won't work. It doesn't mean that they're like the other thing. Well, here's what we'll do. I want to go one by one through 3 common narratives that I've heard on national podcasts, and I'll drop a couple of I don't know. I'll just say what podcasts they are for the most part. What national folks are saying this stuff, and they're not all alone. By the way, I'm gonna name this as we go through it. It is what it is, and why I would disagree. So let's start with this. Yes, it was an overpay from a draft pick perspective, but the idea that they just gave up a bunch of depth pieces and now they have no depth is kind of insane. And I want to circle back to depth later, but I want to speak specifically about the package that went out, not who's on the roster currently. So you listen to, okay, so Bill Simmons talked about this on his podcast with Russillo on, I think it was Sunday, about how, they gave up Vanderbilt. He's a great player. They gave up Patrick Beverly. He was a big part of this team last year. They gave up, I guess they didn't really talk about Balmar. It was really those two. And Malik Beasley, obviously. It's a big deal that they gave up these good rotation guys in a playoff team. Well, yeah, they gave up 3 rotation guys, but they didn't give up any of their 4 best players. The starting lineup is the exact same minus Patrick Beverley plus Rudy Gobert. So to land a consensus top 20 player, I'll give you top 25 if you want to argue it, but nobody's arguing Rudy Gobert is not in the top 25 players. A 3-time defensive player of the year. He's a top 25, and I would argue top 20 NBA player. If you can land a top 25 NBA player without touching your top 4 players on your current roster, in what world is that a bad thing? In what world does that not make you significantly better? Russillo said, maybe they win 55, 56 games, and Simmons made a comment like, I don't even know if they'll do that. They won 46 last year without Rudy Gobert, with a 19 to 20-year-old Anthony Edwards, not an Ant that will be 21 this next year, 2 years under his belt, not a still improving Karl-Anthony Towns, a more comfortable D'Angelo Russell, but most importantly, adding Gobert, and everybody getting a year older, the team is not worse than they were last year. Now, are they 10 full wins better? I don't know. I'm not ready to predict that yet, but to act like it's crazy that they could win 55 games is in fact crazy. I said this, I put it this way the other day. I think it was on Monday's show, or maybe it was even Friday afternoons, my second show last Friday. You're adding a top 20 player to a team already with a top 20 player in Karl-Anthony Towns, and another guy who's not far off. He's probably, I put Ant in the 30 to 35 range this last year. He's going to be a top 25 player this year. I'm pretty sure you're going to have 3 top 25 players. You're adding the best, arguably we'll call him top 3 defensive player to a team with 2 of the best offensive players. You're going to get better. You're going to get quite a few games better. Whether it's 10 or not, I don't know. But to act like it's not a significant improvement is crazy. And yeah, the draft capitals, it's a ton of picks. But put simply, if you can get a top 20 or 25 player in the league without touching your top 4 and essentially just swapping out one starter for this top 20 player, what team in the league wouldn't do that? The long-term ramifications of the contract, yeah, I mean, it could get sticky in a few years when he continues to age. Who knows how he ages as a plus 7-footer. But like right now, for the next 2 to 3 years, this team is significantly better, and the starting lineup is the same and also very young. I mean, D'Angelo Russell in his prime, Karl-Anthony Towns in his prime, Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels 4+ years away from their primes. So Gobert is by far the oldest guy in this lineup. It's just crazy to me that's not more obvious how big of an improvement that is. Like we can talk about on paper all day. On paper, you swap out Patrick Beverley for Rudy Gobert, and I love Patrick Beverley, but Rudy Gobert is a better player, and he's a top 20 player in the NBA. So yes, this team is better. That is not a correct way to evaluate this by just saying, oh man, they lost a bunch of rotation guys. Well, guess what? We'll talk about depth later and who's still on this roster. They're still in pretty good shape. And by not trading another starter for Gobert, I would say that is impressive. And in a vacuum, if you just say that statement to land a top 20 player without losing any of your top 4 you would think it's a coup. Now, again, draft capital, I get it, but I don't want to lose, the forest for the trees here at all. So, okay, 2 more myths that I want to debunk in terms of national kind of narratives, what people are saying about this trade and why I disagree. We're going to do that here next. First, let's talk about our friends, as mentioned, the title sponsors of today's show, and that's Arcade 1-Up. Boom shakalaka. We have big news. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they made it bigger than ever with a Shaq Edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number 1 up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1-Up is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $3.99. And check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. Again, that's arcade, the number 1 up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win. July 8th, that's this Friday, just a couple of days To enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq Edition console, don't miss out. Enter today. All right, a couple more myths to debunk. I talked a little bit about offensive fit on Tuesday's show. I want to just kind of briefly touch on that again. I don't want to spend a lot more time on it, but if you missed Tuesday's show, the Cliff Notes are here. There were some brief mentions on national podcasts, national writers. Pretty much everybody brings up the offensive fit. Like, oh man, how are they going to do this? How are you going to put a 5 next to Karl-Anthony Towns, who is in fact a 5? Now, full disclosure, before the draft, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, before, when Gobert was first brought up as a rumor, maybe 3 weeks ago or so, um, I expressed concern about not just Gobert, but pairing Clint Capella is maybe would have been, in my opinion, a worse fit than Rudy Gobert. But Capella, Gobert, some sort of a defensive minded center who doesn't really stretch the floor. I had concerns with that fit with Karl-Anthony Towns, and I understand why there are some concerns. However, to act like it's a completely foreign concept to play another big with Towns is ignorant of what the Timberwolves have done over the past 5 years or so, right? And again, I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, but go back to the Gorgui Dieng. I mean, Gorgui Dieng played an entire year as a starter. I think he started all 82 games, if I'm not mistaken. Gorgui and Karl-Anthony Towns together in Tom Thibodeau's first year, and they were a decent team that year. They weren't a playoff team, but they weren't horrible. Gorgui played the 4 essentially, and Gorgui and Towns played together. And then Taj Gibson entered the picture. He played functionally like a 5. He could shoot in the mid range and played a little in the post, couple possessions a game, but wasn't shooting threes outside of the odd corner 3 here and there. Not a stretch for by any stretch of the imagination, if you will. Jared Vanderbilt last year, dunker spot all the time. Josh Okogie, when he played the 4, in the dunker spot all the time, or really when he was on the floor, they treated him like a center. The Wolves have really never played with 5 shooters. I shouldn't say never. Their optimal lineup has essentially never had just 5 shooters on the floor at all times. It just hasn't been the case. Occasionally last year when Vando was out of the game, that then yeah, they had 5 shooters on the floor. But for I would say the majority of Towns' time in the NBA, the Wolves have always had somebody who couldn't shoot threes on the floor with Karl-Anthony Towns, and you just had to figure it out. And they've had some good offenses in there too. So I think it's crazy to act like this is a completely foreign concept, and then throw in the fact Rudy Gobert is not a bad offensive player. I know he's disappointed in the playoffs. I get that, but he's still a good pick and roll big. He's still a much better lob target, a pocket pass target for D'Angelo Russell in pick and roll game, and also in the dunker spot, he's far more dangerous. A 7 foot plus guy with a 7'9" wingspan, shooting roughly 70% around the rim, is more dangerous than Jared Vanderbilt and his hands of stone. I love Jared Vanderbilt, but if you're a Jazz fan, you're listening to this and you're worried about Gobert's hands, wait until you see Jared Vanderbilt's hands. Vando is a fantastic player, a playoff rotation player, absolutely, but he couldn't catch a pass. There was at least one turnover a game that was because he just missed a pass, couldn't catch it, lost it out of bounds. And Gobert's a bigger target, a more effective target in all of these different actions than Jared Vanderbilt. And yeah, you're paying him, what is it, 37, 38 million this year, and eventually over basically 50 million a year in a couple of seasons here. You need him to do more than simply play in the dunker spot. But if that's the worst case scenario, it's still far better than what they've been doing in the past. And he still has the ability to play pick and roll and all that stuff. So I think the offensive fit, well, it's going to need some massaging. It's far from a major concern, because remember, Karl-Anthony Towns can do everything. So they could spot him up. They could post him up. He could be the pick. He could set the screen and be the roll man. I mean, you could do anything you want with Karl-Anthony Towns. He could initiate, right? He could be the ball handler in a Towns Gobert, one of the biggest pick and rolls this league's ever seen. All those things are possible. You can do anything you want with Karl-Anthony Towns. And Gobert can do more than the other bigs the Wolves have paired with Towns, by and large. And I think that's important to point out. The other thing, this is my third point, and this circles back to what I mentioned in the first segment related to depth, but I want to talk about the depth the Wolves have currently. And I'll mention again, this is again, I guess Simmons and Russillo talked a little bit about this, the Ringer NBA show as well, with Kevin O'Connor and Chris Vernon touched on this. And I believe I heard Zach Lowe say it on his podcast as well when he talked to John Krasinski from The Athletic. some of the depth concerns nobody's talking about outside of, and I get, Timberwolves podcasters and bloggers, people know that Chris Finch started dropping the Jalen Noel breadcrumbs last week. People don't know about Jalen Noel. And I think that's really important. And I'm not acting like, he's, I don't know, the second coming, or he's not Anthony Edwards, right? But he was better than Malik Beasley last season. And people nationally have no idea that that's the case. There were times in the season where it didn't make sense, really, that other than the contract and also the fact that Malik Beasley just simply should have been better than he was. Jalen Well was a better player than Malik Beasley last year. He just was. There's no two ways about it. He's a 3-level scorer. He's a better passer than Malik Beasley. Beasley's a pretty one-dimensional catch and shoot, transition shooter, good at the rim and transition too, but he's not operating pick and roll. He's not scoring in the mid-range. He's not scoring at the rim. He's not drawing, he's not getting to the free throw line unless it's as a cutter, which he didn't have that many possessions used as a cutter last year. Jalen Well can do all of the above. He can do anything offensively. The issue is obviously defense. And Beasley was better than Jalen on the defensive end of the floor last year. But, I mean, neither were very good. Beasley was better than he usually was, but that's, a minor improvement. Noel's got to improve defensively. He just has to get better. But on offense, he was far better than Malik Beasley last season. And, I mean, like, that alone, I mean, yes, Beasley had the big contract. He has the name. People know him. He averaged 20 points a game effectively in the shortened season a couple years ago. But Jalen Noel, if given that opportunity, is going to have those same types of numbers, but with assist numbers. The assist rate's going to be more impressive. Getting to the free throw line with frequency, getting a bucket in isolation. You don't want Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley would never try and get a bucket in isolation. Jalen Noel can do that. He can be that Swiss Army knife microwave scorer off the bench that Malik Beasley never was. The 6-man role never fit Malik Beasley. He needed others to help him get his offense. A really good player, a very good spot-up shooter, really good in transition, a terror in transition is Malik Beasley. But Jalen Noel is a cross between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards. We'll say a light version of a cross between the two, right? He's not better than either one of them yet, and will never likely be better than Anthony Edwards. But he is a really, really good offensive player. And overlooking that is foolish. I think that you could argue the bench gets better with Noel replacing Beasley's minutes. Obviously, losing that depth hurts a little. Losing Vanderbilt clearly hurts. But then you add Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson is, as of right now, today, a better player than Jared Vanderbilt. And you could argue Jalen Noel is a better player than Malik Beasley. And so now you've sent out two guys and replaced them with guys that are better. Noel for Beasley, Anderson for Vanderbilt, and then you bring back Taurean Prince. Your top 8 is just as good as it was last season. And again, losing Beverly, obviously, you lose a little bit of depth, but you're sending out Beverly, you're sending out Beasley, you're sending out Vanderbilt, and you're bringing in Gobert, top 20 player, Kyle Anderson, a really good player who's been on a bunch of playoff teams, and I would argue better than Jared Vanderbilt, and more flexible positionally, can stretch the floor a little bit, at least more than Vando. And then you trade Beasley for Noel. You send out Beasley and his minutes get backfilled by Jalen Noel. Noel's a more versatile and a better all-around offensive player. So you could argue that the depth is actually better sitting here right now today on July 6th than it was last season. Maybe not 1 through 12 because those guys are advancing in their roles, and now the back of the bench is, well, currently pretty vacant, but you got a couple of rookies and stuff like that. So yeah, 1 through 12, maybe not. But your 1 through 8 is every bit as good. 1 through 9 is every bit as good. You still got Jordan McLaughlin. You still got Naz Reid. So your 1 through 10, you could even say, is every bit as good as it was last year. And I think it's foolish to just say, oh, they sent out 3 rotation guys. Well, guess what? They already brought 2 in Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert. So yeah, they sent out 3 rotation guys, but they got 2 back. They brought back Taurean Prince, and then now Jalen Noel gets his opportunity. So, and that's again understandable from a national perspective. I just think it's all, here's the storyline, here's the narrative, let's run with it. It's not accurate. This Timberwolves team has depth to it still, and they're still looking to add a couple of deep bench pieces as well. Okay, that's all about Gobert today. I just needed to get on a little bit of a soapbox. I was getting frustrated listening to all these national folks just kind of be like, hey, they gave up too much, plus it's a terrible fit. No. Yeah, they gave up a lot of picks. This is going to be a good team next year. I'm not predicting anything yet, but I mean, hey, I said this on Locked On Today. I'm on a Locked On Today show for Wednesday. I talked to Peter Bukowski about this. I said, hey, he asked me where I think the Wolves will be. I said 3 to 5 seed. I mean, sitting here right now, there's a lot of things that are going to happen. There's injuries. We just found out about the Jaren Jackson injury, so there's tons that's going to happen between now and mid-October. But as of right now, the Wolves are a 3 to 5 seed in the West. I think that that's a really safe thing to say. And it's crazy to just write off this trade as a bad trade and a bad fit and the whole thing. All right, let's close today by talking a real quick summer league overview. I want to break down the roster into basically 4 categories as we look ahead to summer league. Who should you be looking out for in summer league? And then a couple of these guys I want to pull out and do a little bit bigger profiles on prior to Friday night's first game of the Las Vegas Summer League for the Wolves. So we're going to get to all that here next. First, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball. And of course, I don't know actually if you could bet on NBA Summer League. I hope you can't, but you probably can at BetOnline.net. And of course, there still are prop bets related to NBA free agency, so go check those out. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. They're your best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, golf. I mentioned MLB. Also, we're only 5 weeks or so away from the start of NFL preseason, so get excited for that. That's definitely on BetOnline as well. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, closing the show today with a little bit of a summer league overview. Again, the Wolves' first game is Friday night. I believe they play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. And it's probably Friday, Sunday, Monday, with an off day mixed in there. But they do open Friday evening, and all the games are on either ESPN, ESPNU, or NBA TV. So I want to break down the roster that was announced. I will say the roster was announced last Thursday by the team. It was prior to the trade. So like Walker Kessler was on the roster, and Leandro Balmaro was on the roster. Those guys aren't on the team anymore. So obviously there could be a couple of additions. And I just double checked. The team hasn't like re-announced or re-released the roster. So given who's on the roster now, I'm going to give you 4 categories of guys to watch out for. The remaining draft picks are on the team. That's Wendell Moore Jr., it's Josh Minot, second round pick, and then Mateo Spagnuolo, also second round pick, the 50th overall pick in the draft. Interesting that Spagnuolo is going to be on the roster. He hasn't signed a contract. It wasn't part of the press conference when they introduced Moore, Minot, and Kessler last week. So I think everybody still expects him to play overseas. Connolly said that post-draft that they expect him to play overseas next year too. But cool that Spagnuolo is over here and will play. Obviously, he'd be most intriguing to watch, maybe of anybody, if he does play, because nobody's seen him play, obviously, stateside. We're just all relying on these clips. Although if you listen to my conversation with Rafael Barlow last week from the NBA Big Board show on the Locked On Network, he did see Spagnuolo play in person last year. That was last Monday's episode, the Monday following the draft. So if you go check that out, he had some interesting intel on Spagnuolo after seeing him in person. But it would be a lot of fun to see him play. I have no idea. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play much at all. But I expect Minot and Wendell Moore to probably both start and get a ton of minutes. The second category, guys, to pay attention to are a couple of players who were on the Iowa Wolves last year and played for the Summer League team. That's Brian Bowen, the second, a former two-way player for the Indiana Pacers just a couple of years ago, and then Matt Lewis. Both were effective players at the G League level last year. Matt Lewis started 13 games for the Iowa Wolves and shot, I guess he was just a hair under 30% from 3, but his college shooting stats are impressive. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. And then Brian Bowen did his thing in the G League for the Wolves last year as well. And again, was a two-way player for the Pacers the year prior to that. In the G League last year in 12 starts, he averaged 16 points a game. This is Brian Bowen, 33% from outside the arc, and it is a long, rangy defender, pretty good defensive rebounder for a 6'6" forward. So he's a name to keep an eye on, somebody that should look familiar if you watch Summer League or any of the Iowa Wolves last year. He was also, I believe, in training camp for a little bit on an Exhibit 10 deal last year for the Wolves as well. Which brings me to my next category, the Exhibit 10 players this year. Names rumored for that that were rumored to be Exhibit 10s right after the draft. I touched on these guys a little bit post-draft, so I don't want to spend too much time on them now. But Phillip Wheeler, really athletic kid out of New Jersey, was a high schooler there, ended up, due to academics, went and played overseas and did some different things instead of going to college. And he's a project, a lot of projectability there with his size and athleticism, but a fascinating player. Hopefully he gets minutes. And then Kevon Harris as well, as an Exhibit 10 guy, with an opportunity to make an impact in this year's Summer League. And then there's 3 guys on the roster with NBA experience that I think are really interesting. Well, I should say 3 guys with NBA experience, one of whom I think is really interesting. Melvin Frazier Jr. Played for the Magic for a couple of seasons, 18-19, 19-20, played in 29 total games, and then 3 games for the Thunder just this last year, and has played just a little in the G League. But he is a 2-guard, 6'5" 2-guard that played his college ball for Tulane, and just kind of not an outstanding shooter. You look at his college numbers. I mean, he shot 38.5% his senior year, or I guess his junior last year at Tulane, but was for his career in college, just 31% from outside the arc. So not a lot to write home about there. Deontay Burton is another name that might sound familiar, who has played in the NBA for the Thunder for a couple of seasons, even appeared in playoff games for them in 18-19 and 19-20, has bounced around a little bit, G League mostly since then. And he's kind of an undersized combo guard forward, like a 6'4", really kind of a 2-3 type player, and not an outstanding shooter either. Hasn't really shown that at any level. So it's the athleticism, it's a little bit of length there that's intriguing, but another guy with NBA experience who you may recognize. Marielle Shayock is the one, to me, that's most interesting. And hopefully he gets some run. But he played in 4 games for the Sixers back in the 1920 season. He's almost 27. He turns 27 later this month. So he's older, but he's 6'5". He's kind of a longer guy. He played 3 years at Virginia and 1 year at Iowa State, shot 38% from 3 over his college career, 38.1%, was actually on a 2-way deal with the Sixers back in 1920, which of course was the season that was shortened midseason by COVID. And is intriguing to me as a potential guy who could end up on the Iowa Wolves. He played, going back to that 1920 season as a 2-way guy, played in 36 games in the G League and averaged 22 points per game, 35.6% from beyond the arc, and did a few other things that are interesting as well. Not an outstanding rebounder, but it looks like he initiated some offense, a really nice assist rate there in the G League as well. So Marielle Shayock, Canadian player, 6'6" guard to keep an eye on in Summer League. And then a couple of other undrafted guys who are rookies. David Mccormick, who I think is interesting, out of Kansas. This would be, I guess, my 5th category. He's a big, essentially a center from Kansas. A little bit of a shot blocker, not much range in terms of his offense, but played 4 years at a major, college blue blood type program. So interested to see McCormick. And then also in terms of another undrafted rookie, George Condit, the 4th from Iowa State, will also be on the team. I don't know. I don't know much about him. Numbers aren't great at Iowa State for him, but he was a 4-year guy there. So he'll be a depth piece on the Summer League team as well. So later this week, I do want to dig into a couple of these names and really kind of like, hey, who am I hoping sees additional run? But I wanted to at least familiarize a little bit with the roster and the different categories of guys that will be in Vegas for the Wolves this week. All right. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. It's obviously greatly appreciated. And of course, you can find this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. No matter where you listen, you can find Locked On Wolves and all your favorite Locked On shows. You can also follow this show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the Locked On Network is all your local experts on all of your favorite stories all the time. Make sure you're following and subscribe to all of your favorite teams. And a reminder that for your second listen, you can get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every single day, Monday through Friday, with Locked On NBA. Again, Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.